will appear on the right-hand side. This will enable you to open the agenda reports as a PDF and follow the meeting. My role is to ensure the meeting runs smoothly, having regards to procedure, behaviour and ethics. To explain who are with us, I have planning officers, a highway engineer, an environmental health officer, and they will explain the applications, provide technical advice as may be required. The council solicitor will provide legal advice on procedural matters, and voting will be by a show of hands. The elected members will consider the applications, collectively make decisions, and voting will be by a show of hands. Apologies. Each application will be introduced by the planning officers, and where a qualifying petition, which can either be 25 signatures or 15 letters of objection, I will invite their representatives to invite the meeting for 5 minutes. I will then invite the applicant or their agent to address us for 5 minutes. I will also invite statutory consultees, local consultees and ward councillors may also address the committee. Each will be open to questions after their contribution. I will explain later we have a slight change from that procedure on one of the applications. Once all the applications have been made, and following any questions of clarification from members, speakers may not participate in any of the debate that follows within the committee. The application will then be open to debate and discussion by members and will then make a decision on the application. When making decisions, members must have regard for the provisions of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, which requires decision makers to only have regard to material planning considerations. Members must also have regard to the local planning policies and the national planning policy framework and guidance. The national framework makes a presumption in favour of sustainable development. Paragraph 11 requires approval of development proposals that accord with an up-to-date development plan without delay unless the adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies of the national framework taken as a whole. It is a matter for each member individually to balance any material considerations and to decide what weight to give to them. Members must not predetermine any application or matter that comes to the committee for decision. However, it is permissible for members to be predisposed towards a particular outcome with regards to an application, provided they do not make their minds on how to vote before formally considering the application details, listening to the presentation and a full debate. Members must have listened to all the debate and considered all the facts before deciding whether to move any motion. If a member is minded to put forward a motion, it is good practice first to seek advice from the officers on the wording of any potential motion. Okay, so moving into the apologies. So we have Dave Mitchell who's standing in for Stuart. Are there any other apologies? Yes.
Hi, Chair. Alison Wright is standing in for Andrew Gardner. Okay,
welcome Alison and welcome Dave. We've got the minutes, but before I move into the minutes, there was, not minuted, but there was a discussion at the last committee about how members should approach the safety issue around face coverings. And we were asked to seek guidance. The guidance we've had is fairly clear. Where you should wear your mask at all times unless speaking, but I understand the heat and temperature in here, and maybe the attempt, obviously don't drink water with your mask on, but there will be times when you'll need to have that quick little breather. But by and large, we need to protect ourselves and, more importantly, protect other people against any spread of the virus. What happens after the 19th, who knows, but for tonight, they're the rules, okay? Thank you very much indeed. So moving into the minutes, with that sort of reference back, are there any objections to the minutes? There is one typo. We refer on page 2, Councillor Gardner as Gardinier or something. So we'll correct that. We don't want to offend him. Can someone move them as a true record? Seconded? Okay, so we agree those minutes. It's not my intention to alter the agenda order. So we'll move on to, Neil, who is now going to present It's his first time on stage, so as we say at the floor, he'll break a leg. And we wish him well with his presentation. So, sorry. Oh, can't forget that. You can see him a bit ring rusty. Declarations of interest. Are there any? I have a very short one on item 3. I have been in the past a member of the Friends of Birkenhead Park, but my membership has lapsed. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 3 then, is that okay? So, Neil, presentation please.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to Irvine House, formerly known as the Ezra Club. The site is within the Birkenhead Park Conservation Area and adjoins Birkenhead Park itself. The application proposes to vary Condition 2 of Planning Permission APP 16-00732 to alter the approved plans. This original permission proposed to convert the existing building into 11 apartments and to construct 7 houses and 21 apartments to the rear. The amendments proposed are considered relatively minor and relate to the new build units which are at the rear of the site adjacent to Birkenhead Park. The changes include a new terrace added to the second floor of the apartments, increase in height of the apartments by 0.7 metres and some window and elevational changes. The original permission has been implemented and can therefore be built out. The application is therefore only to assess the proposed amendments and the principle of the development has been established. So on the slide that you can see now, the proposed layout, there's no change to the siting of the proposed buildings. Birkenhead Park is to the top of the screen. You've got 2 blocks of apartments directly adjacent to the park and then the houses at the bottom. So you've got the approved scheme on the right and the proposed on the left. But as I said, there's no change to the footprint of those buildings. It should be noted that an increase in parking spaces has been previously approved under a discharge of conditions application. This therefore does not form part of this application. In any case, the parking area is considered to be largely screened from the wider area. Next slide, please. So this is an image of one of the proposed apartment buildings as proposed, which is an elevation that faces the park. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed courtyard elevation of one of the apartment buildings as proposed. The red line that you can see along the top indicates the building as approved and indicates the proposed 0.7 metre increase in height, which we consider to be fairly minor. Next slide, please. So this just shows the apartment buildings in a bit more detail, showing that there's some elevation and fenestration changes, again, but they're considered to be relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, with the design approach still pretty much similar. You'll also notice the location of proposed terraces. So on the bottom left-hand picture, to the left of the gables, there are effectively glass balustrades. Next slide, please. And this is the side profile of those buildings, which shows the location of the terraces. So Birkenhead Park's to the right, so this indicates that the glass balustrade and the new terraces will be set back quite a bit from the park elevation, and therefore the impact is likely to be minimal. Next slide, please. Is this the proposed changes to the houses? Again, considered to be fairly minimal changes, some window alterations, but all in all, fairly similar to the approved scheme. Next slide, please. And this is just the side profile of the houses with the outline of the approved in a red dotted line. So again, showing very minimal changes to what has been approved. So overall, the proposed changes are considered to be minor and will not have any greater impact upon the character of the conservation area or the setting of Birkenhead Park when compared to the approved scheme. One final note is that we have been made aware that 4 sycamore trees shown as being retained have now been removed, and it's therefore proposed to attach an additional condition to the recommendation. I'll just read that out now. So it's to read, notwithstanding the landscaping set out on drawing, DW, SD, SK, JSL, BSTS, R7, prior to commencement of the new build unit, a scheme for replacement tree planting for trees T25, T26, T27 and T33 shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. The approved scheme shall be in accordance with the Wirral tree, hedgerow and woodland strategy and shall be carried out in full no later than the first planting season following first occupation of the new build units. Any trees which die or become diseased within 5 years of occupation shall be replaced with a comparable specimen. So the proposal is considered to comply with a local and national policy and is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the additional condition, and there has been a petitional objection received. And I don't know, go back to slide 6 perhaps, Vicky, please. Probably the best one. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, there is a qualifying petition. However, the lead petitioner is classed himself as vulnerable to the COVID conditions. So he's asked permission for it to be, his submission to be read out. So I thought the fairest way would be to ask the solicitor to read out the submission. Can you say who it's from and then read? And you'll have 5 minutes.
Yeah. First of all, my glasses are steaming up, so I'll need to take my mask off if members forgive me. So this is a petition of Robert Lee on behalf of the Friends of Birkenhead in opposition to this application. So the statement states, it is almost a year since this application was submitted, yet only 5 days' notice was given for this meeting. Some of you may remember the original application, APP 16-00732, which was validated just over 5 years ago. The fact that it was granted on the casting vote of the then Chair of Planning Committee reflected the strength of the arguments assembled by the Friends and widespread support from national, regional and local heritage and conservation agencies. The key issue now is straightforward: how to mitigate the damage to the international heritage status of Birkenhead Park from any significant changes to the plans that have already been approved for the new build, 7 townhouses and 21 apartments. Graham Arnold, now chairman of the Friends, submitted to the Planning Department in September 2020 a detailed critique of this application, which I trust has been circulated to all committee members. The key issues are as follows. First, most if not all of the proposed design amendments will exacerbate the negative impact of the new build developments on Birkenhead Park. This is particularly evident in the addition of a second floor 12.5 metre balcony on the apartment block, the ground floor projections which will reduce by 1.5 metres from 8 to 6.5 metres, the gap between their foundations and the boundary trees directly adjacent to the park drive, and the increase in the height of both ridges and eaves, which will simply make the new housing units more visible from the park. Second, the application proposed an increase in car parking provision of almost 20% from 32 to 38. This was a critical issue for all our petitioners. For whatever reason, it is not included in the application to be discussed today. So that was in relation to the previous application, the application 20/00998. For whatever reason, it is not included in the application to be discussed today, which should therefore have been resubmitted with a reduced set of objectives. There is no record on file of any earlier agreement by planning staff to allow such increase, and it is inconceivable that permission has been granted in-house without the committee's knowledge. The revised landscape layout, however, contains 38 parking spaces. No provision has been made for visitors or for residents with 2 cars. At a time when there is increasing pressure on Wirral residents to use public transport, to walk or to use bicycles, this significant rise in car parking provision is very disturbing. Moreover, in comparison with the original application, standards have been reduced. Where previously there were pathways between the car parking spaces in front of the 3-storey apartment block, these have now been removed so that the whole parking area will become a concrete desert with high levels of airborne pollution. Third, the original developers have done an excellent job in restoring 54 to 56 Park Road South, but the prime concern of the Friends and all the heritage groups that opposed the original application was a negative impact of the new build on what Wirral Council correctly regards as a unique international heritage asset. How long have I got?
2 minutes.
I am sure that you are all aware of the Council's strategic objective of achieving World Heritage Site inscription, not only because Birkenhead was the first publicly funded park in the world and the model for New York's Central Park, but because of the regeneration benefits this would bring for the people of Birkenhead and of the Wirral in general. The nomination dossier is virtually complete. The development funding invested by the Council will pay dividends once a call for new applications is issued by DCMS, and all the feedback and responses to date have been immensely supportive. Finally, I'm sure you can understand the intensely competitive world of the World Heritage Site application process. ICOMOS UK, the National Committee of the International Council on Monuments and Sites, which plays a key advisory role to HMG, is fully supportive of the Birkenhead Park application. But in 2017, it notified the Planning Committee of the serious and irreversible impact of the new build on our candidacy for World Heritage Site status. We can't jeopardise this opportunity, which fully reflects the Council's plans for the much-awaited regeneration of Birkenhead. Every step should be taken at the juncture to guarantee that any visual and environmental damage generated by the new townhouses, apartments and circa 40 car parking spaces is kept to a minimum. Otherwise, in making new concessions to the developers, despite having fulfilled the first restoration stage of the project, the World Heritage Site application may be rejected. Developers, from my limited experience, often seek to extract the greatest possible gain from projects. Despite the fact that APP 20/009/98 is only to be debated at Planning Committee today, work has already started on all elements of the new build. The extended foundations have been laid for all different elements, including the apartment block, and bricklayers have made substantial progress in the case of the townhouses. Trees which were due to be retained on the basis of the revised landscape layout have already been felled, and the gap between the new build at its closest point to the park is probably no more than 5 metres, rather than 8 metres as originally permitted. I would therefore appeal to you, please defer your consideration of this application, undertake a site visit to ensure that everything possible is done to mitigate the negative impact of Stage 3 of the development on the heritage status of Birkenhead Park and its strategic role in the regeneration of Birkenhead. Yours sincerely, Robert Lee. And he then provides an apology for being present due to for medical reasons. Yeah.
Okay. So we've heard from the objector via the Borough Solicitor. Does the applicant wish to speak? Yeah, if you could bring yourself forward. Yeah, press the middle of the mic, it should come on. And if you can state your name, and again, you will have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Thank you. Good evening. My name is Paul Tunstall. I'm from JWPC Town Planners. I sat before you at this committee in January 17 as agent for Mr Kelly and spoke in support of his proposal. And I recall the application led to considerable debate and thoughtful debate when all the issues were aired, many of which were recited earlier by on behalf of Mr Lee. And it was ultimately approved. It seems the only reason I'm here again tonight is because the Friends of Birkenhead Park are still aggrieved by that decision that you took and have used this application, which proposes very minor and superficial changes, as a vehicle upon which to continue their objections. Mr Kelly bought this site in March 2014 with a vision to secure its future. And at that time, the roof was partially missing following a fire, and the only residents there were pigeons. Today, it stands restored to its former glory and fully occupied, thanks to the consent you granted in 17. And having invested considerable personal effort in this, and well over £1 million, true to his word and in line with the 106, he has conserved Irvine House before developing the new build units to the rear of the site. And clearly, whilst the new build houses and apartments are less palatable to the Friends of Birkenhead Park, their construction and sale is absolutely essential to allow my client to balance the books. Their form, their position and appearance has already been approved, and you've seen from the presentation from Neil today that the changes themselves are very minor. Details of landscaping, both hard and soft, have already been approved as well. And so can I thank officers for their assistance so far in the application over the past few months and their efforts to get it to committee tonight. This is a Section 73 application. That means that it's only the changes between what's approved and what we're proposing now is open for discussion or decision. As I said, they're very minor, set out in the report, but suffice to say they're supported by officers. But not only that, there's no objection from any statutory consultees, having consulted Historic England and the Garden History Society, for example. The points within the petition seem to relate more to the context of the drawings and the ability to understand them than rather what they actually show. The objection about materials is not relevant as they remain as per the approved scheme. The comments in parking spaces aren't relevant to this application. The applicant is in discussions to make improvements to an already approved plan in line with your Highways Officer's comments, and that dialogue continues. This may mean a non-material amendment is submitted separately, but these changes will be entirely outside the scope of this application. and not the recommendation of an additional condition addressing landscaping. This follows an unfortunate error on behalf of the applicant's contractors, who are no longer appointed. My client can only apologise for the accidental removal of the 4 trees and can reassure members that the condition suggested tonight will secure suitable replacement planting, which we'll obviously agree and have in place as soon as possible. It's worth mentioning that 5 years ago, the arboricultural assessment said that those 4 trees had less than a 20-year lifespan left. I checked that before I came this evening. So whilst there's no excuse for their removal, I think that in terms of longevity, there's perhaps an option there of a better solution in the long term. As I said, it was a genuine error that offers no benefit to the developer or future occupants, and I hope we can agree with the condition. It's been 5 years since the original drawings from the new build apartments for the apartments and houses were drafted. The changes proposed seek to add value without significant change to the external appearance of the site.
You've got 1 minute left if you could...
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. They remain consistent with the original heritage advice and are often described within the report as discreet, reducing the bulk and tying with the original design concept. More importantly, the report says, paragraph 3.8.6, it would not result in the development having a detrimental or adverse impact upon the setting of the park or on the integrity of the conservation area. The applicant has made good on his promise to revitalise and conserve the ESWA, an important local heritage asset. If you approve this application, it will allow him to proceed with confidence with the works necessary to reward that risk and recover significant commitments he has made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for keeping to time. We do allow questions of the applicant. Yeah, you're not off the up yet, mate. You do ask the applicant to answer questions from members, if there are any. If there aren't, not seeing any, okay. Now you're off the hook, you can take your seat. Okay, so the application now is open to members' questions of officers, comments, and I'll take, if you indicate by a show of hand, I'll bring you into the debate. Kath Hodgson.
Yeah, just wanted to say it's, I was quite surprised when I saw the change of the plans. I think the proposed change is far nicer than the original design, and I think it looks particularly appealing aesthetically, so I don't have a problem with it, Chair.
Sam Frost.
Thanks, Chair. In a similar place, I think it was useful for me to see in the consultations. I know the Friends of Birkenhead Park have shared their objectives, but in terms of Historic England, etc., and all these other bodies, no objections from them in terms of the kind of the upkeep and the well-being of protecting this important site. So no objections from me either.
Sorry, Chair, I couldn't understand half of what the young lady said.
Sure. No problem. My perspective was that given that there were no objections from other bodies, so I think the consultations covered Historic England, the Garden the History Society, highways, etc., that felt quite comforting from my perspective. I know the Friends have shared their challenges and hear and note them, but there were no objections from my side. Thanks, Chair.
Yes, Harvey, is it? Yeah.
Harry, no, it's all right. I'd just like to welcome the additional securities for trees at the site, but considering that this project has already been approved for the large part, is there any way to tell how much difference these slight alterations will have on achieving World Heritage status compared to the original?
Yeah, thank you. We have had discussions with the Council's officer in relation to that, Rob Belcher, and I think because this scheme is effectively, it's been granted, so and it's an extant permission, the changes are minor, and the Council's officer on that accepts, given the fact that it's had previous approval, that it's acceptable. It's had limited additional impact on the Birkenhead Park. So we're confident that it won't have a significant impact on our bid for World Heritage status. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other contributions, I'll make a contribution myself and then maybe make a recommendation if no one else is going to. I mean, I think Professor Lee referred back to the original decision, and it was well debated, and it was a 6-5 vote. I think we were 11 then. And the reality is that that decision has been made, and that is the most material consideration, is that the application has been approved. So we're not here to debate the principle that was debated at that point. It is an enabling development, though. The basis of the application from that time was that the other part that is being slightly altered tonight was to enable the saving of Irvine House. And people who don't know, Sandy Irvine was part of the Everest team that got to the summit. So that was of great, it wasn't listed, but it was of great historical interest to residents. And they have done, I have to say, they have done a fine job, and even Professor Lee accepts that. So phase 1 of the application has been achieved, and they've devoted their resources onto that part of the application and done a good job. Now, the other part, which was objected to by people at the time, is being slightly altered. And my view is there enough merit in the alterations to fundamentally undermine that material decision, which was one of approval? And I'm thinking there probably isn't, frankly, if we're talking honestly. I've been back down on the site to have a look and make sure. And even with those trees being removed, there is a quite excessive tree coverage on the park boundary. And that's grown over the 5 years to be even more coverage for the park boundary. And if you do go around Birkenhead Park, there are varying models of properties around the park. To just pick out on this one to say, would that damage World Heritage Sites? I could think of 2 or 3 other developments that may be, contributing to that. My view is that we should continue to seek World Heritage Site for the park. I think it would be a feather in everybody's cap, and it is of historic nature. But if you actually read the history of the park, Paxton actually built the park to enhance the sale of the properties around the periphery. And this is a significant investment on the periphery of the park. If design is, the eye is in the, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, particularly on design. My view is that there's not significant change to warrant a refusal. So unless someone wants to move approval.
I'll move approval, Chair.
Okay, don't forget, with the extra condition around extra planting to replace those sycamore trees. Anyone prepared to second? Sam Frost is seconding it, so moved and seconded. Anybody want to move? Well, no, we move to that vote, don't we? Okay, so all those in favour? Is there any further debate around the move for approval? I think we've had the debate and questions, haven't we? Yeah. Nobody else wants to speak? Okay, so we'll move straight to the vote. All those in favour of approval, please show.
That's unanimous.
And none against? No. So that is unanimous and has been approved with the extra condition. Must forget that. Okay. Okay. Thank you for everyone who's attended on behalf of that item. We now move on to item number 4. Just for procedural matters, we will take 4 and 5 as a joint presentation, but the votes must be separate. Okay, so people understand that. So we're listening to a presentation of 4 and 5 combined, then we move to separate votes after the debate and all the other procedural issues.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for the conversion of the existing Red Court building into 15 apartments and the erection of a new apartment building containing 30 apartments. Red Court is a Grade 2 listed building, and therefore listed building consent has also been submitted to deal with the alterations to the listed building. This presentation will deal with both applications, but as Councillor Fawkes set out, the committee will be required to vote separately on each application. And there has been a petition of objection received. Next slide, please. So this is just some images of Red Court, the listed building. It includes an existing annex which is to be removed. The photo on the bottom right probably shows it best. That's a later addition to the building, obviously being designed to match as much as it can, but it doesn't form part of the listing, and we're therefore satisfied that its removal won't harm the listed building. Slide 14, please. So the principle of converting the listed building into apartments is considered acceptable, given that the site sits within a primarily residential area. The works of the listed building are considered to be relatively minor and will have limited impact on its character. These works include the addition of roof lights and light wells and some suspended ceilings. A window strategy has been submitted and windows will be retained where possible. There's one original door in the building which will be retained and replicated throughout. These works are considered relatively minor and will have limited impact on the integrity of the listed building. It's currently vacant, and a proposed conversion into 15 residential units will secure the continued use of the building, which is welcomed. As noted, to the west of Red Court will be a 3 to 4 storey building containing 30 apartments. The new build apartment scheme has been significantly amended since the original submission. The current proposal now proposes a contemporary interpretation of the main character elements of Red Court, such as the sweeping roof pitches and animated elevations. Slide 17, please. So these are the elevations of the proposed building. So top left is the front elevation, which I'll come back to shortly, and the other elevations just showing how the building reduces and steps down to the rear. So it goes from 4 stories to the front to 3 stories to the rear. Next slide, please. So the front elevation, this shows the protruding bays, dormers, division into vertical bays and varied window dimensions, which all help to provide movement and depth. The roof arrangement is complex, reflecting that of Red Court, and contains a series of interesting gables and ridges with differing orientations. Next slide, please, Vicky. So the contextual elevations help to show the scale of the building. As you can see, it's located between 2 large buildings, obviously Red Court itself and another established block of flats. The proposed building will be slightly set further back, which will allow Red Court to dominate the street scene. And an existing large brick wall running along the front of the site will be retained. Next slide, please. So this is a visualisation of the proposal. Perhaps notable is the different brick tone compared to Red Court. This helps to establish the new building as a contemporary structure, which illustrates a clear distinction between this and the listed building, allowing the new building to respect Red Court, whilst also standing alone as a well-designed building. In general, in terms of parking, the scheme provides 42 parking spaces for the 45 units, which is considered suitable for this location. 48 cycle parking spaces will also be provided. Given the previous use as a school, the creation of 45 apartments and the traffic associated with such a development is considered unlikely to generate a significant level of traffic on the network in comparison, and it's therefore considered that the scheme will not have a material impact on the highway. In terms of residential amenity, the new building steps down to 3 stories to the rear to minimise the impact on properties on Beresford Avenue. All required separation distances from the new building are met with surrounding properties. It's therefore considered that the proposal will not have an unacceptable adverse impact upon the amenities of these neighbouring properties. There are large areas of private amenity space provided for future occupiers located to the rear and side of the buildings, and this improved landscaping of the site will not only provide good amenity space for occupiers, but will also enhance the setting of the listed building and how the new building sits on the street scene. Overall, the proposed development secures the continued use of a listed building, with the new building considered to be suitably designed and scaled to be respectful to the listed building. The quality of accommodation and parking provision provided is considered acceptable, and the proposal is not considered to be harmful to the amenities of neighbouring properties. Therefore, on balance, and having regards to local and national policy, in particular National Planning Policy Framework paragraph 193, the proposal is recommended for approval, subject to a Section 106 agreement to secure 20% affordable housing. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Chair, you're able to, you can debate both, but you need to vote separately on them. So we'll make it clear when it gets to the vote what you're voting on.
Okay, I note.
Sorry, Chair, we're having great difficulty in hearing what's being said this end.
That's why I do apologise.
And the previous comments from the planning officer as well.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Apologies.
Sorry, Chair. To repeat, I said that the debate can cover both item 4, which is about the planning application. So that's the change of use of the listed building plus the new build. And then item 5 relates to listed building consent. So that's for the internal works, effectively, and demolition on the listed building element. So I'm content, and it's probably easier for members, I think, if you've got any debate or questions, that we deal with both items together. But when it comes to the vote, you have to vote separately. So you'd have to vote, first of all, on the planning application and then on the listed building. And we'll make it clear when it comes to that, how to do it.
Okay, so my following comment, Dave, was I noticed from the paperwork on item 4, there is a qualifying petition, and asked the question, is there an objector who wishes to address the committee? And are you the objector, or are you said objector?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Okay, so you're speaking on behalf of the petitioners?
Yes, I am.
Ah, that's fine, okay. So we would take the petitioner first. Is the applicant wishing to speak in present? No? Okay. And then I do believe that there's a ward councillor wishes to speak as well, said Alan Brame. Okay. If you give your name and address there, and then you'll have the 5 minutes allocated to everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Daniel Travers. I live at 16 Beresford Road, and so, in fact, my back garden backs on immediately to the playground. I've been nominated to speak on behalf of the 40 signatories to the petition. There were also 27 individual letters, I believe most, if not all, objecting. I hope I speak on behalf of all my neighbours and concerned local residents, not simply those who signed the petition. I note that there were no additional comments made following the amendments. This must not be read as silent approval. The amendments make no or negligible difference to the residents' objections. I instructed Philip Rothwell, a planning and development consultant, to make submissions on my behalf in a letter he submitted dated the 19th of October, and I adopt all of his objections, which remain following the amendments. We welcome appropriate development of the listed building. We do not want to see the building derelict. We understand that the playground site must also be utilised, and realistically it must be development. The concerns raised primarily relate to the new build 4-storey block of 30 flats. We submit that the members should refuse this application on the basis that the proposed development, by reason of its design, scale, massing and appearance, would firstly have an unacceptable impact on the amenity and privacy of adjacent properties, and secondly would have a detrimental effect on the setting of the adjacent listed building. There is no doubt that the 4-storey block of 30 apartments will have a huge impact on the amenity of residents who live on Devonshire Place, the road shown in that picture, and Beresford Road to the rear. I already know from personal experiences that this application has caused great upset, and sadly some people have moved and others plan to move if this application is granted. I've read the report and the summary of objections. And we do not accept that the amendments have improved the amenity for existing residents. We note the reference to policy HS4, the criteria for new housing development, the proposal being of a scale which relates well to surrounding property, in particular with regard to existing densities and form of development. We submit that the proposal does not relate well to surrounding property, particularly the 2-storey houses that directly face to the front and the rear of the site. All of the pictures that have been shown on the slides only show the 2 larger properties, the listed building and Oaklands, and fail to refer to all of the properties on Devonshire Place and Beresford Road that are 2-storey dwellings. But we focus our main objection and rely on policy HS5, the Density and Design Guidelines. And this clearly states that new purpose-built 3-storey flats will not be permitted. And we submit that this application breaches the unequivocal prohibition of new purpose-built 3-storey flats. And of course, the policy does not even contemplate a 4-storey block. The local residents would welcome, as per HS5 policy, 2- or 3-storey houses, and we would be accepting of a purpose-built 2-storey block of flats. And we invite the members to robustly uphold that policy and refuse this application. This is a fundamental breach of a policy, and it goes far in excess of that policy by applying for a 4-storey block. The neighbouring buildings, Oaklands and Red Courts, are both 3-storey.
You have a minute left, sir. So
thank you. Are both 3-storey. One of them may have some attic rooms, but they are 3-storey buildings. There are no 4-storey flats in that area. And the 4 stories must be compared in scale with all of the 2-storey properties. I raised 2 other specific concerns, but our primary concern is that this is a 4-storey block. The highways shown there with a double yellow line do not have double yellow lines, and certainly if this application is passed, there should be consultation with existing residents to permit, that is a narrow road with a 20-mile-an-hour restriction, and if parking is permitted on both sides, that will lead to conflict. There are also particular concerns about the management of such a large block, where the management company are based, and in particular the balconies that are now proposed in the amended plans, and whether there will be any restrictions on conditions as to the use of those balconies. But on behalf of the local residents, Chair, I understand. I submit that this is in breach of that policy, and that the panel should robustly refuse the application for a 4-storey block of apartments. This area has had its fill of 3-storey blocks and doesn't need a 4-storey block.
Thank you for nearly keeping to time. Thanks very much. Okay. So we don't have the applicant. Is the applicant present? Oh, sorry. Anyone want to question the object there? Yes, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. I've got questions not directed to the objector, but to the planning officers. We'll wait after. Yeah.
Mike, not again. Moving on then, we do have a ward councillor who wishes to present, and it's Councillor Brain. You don't have a time limit, but we...
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, members, for allowing me to address you on this matter. And I'd like to endorse what Mr. Travers has so eloquently said. There are 2 aspects to this application. One is the restoration and conversion of the Grade 2 listed building at Red Court. And as Mr. Travers says, there's no fundamental objection to that. It's a fine building that must be retained. And there are 1 or 2 minor quibbles that the officers have pointed out in their report about 1 or 2 of the apartments that are going to be formed, but those, I think, can certainly be accepted. So there's no problem with that. The issue does arise with the proposed new 4-storey block of apartments. The planning officer said before that it lies between Red Court and Oaklands, and he described it as an established 3-storey block of flats. It isn't a 3-storey block of flats. It is an old house that, like Red Court, has already been converted into apartments. It is not a block of flats, so we must be clear on that. The issue, of course, is the scale of this building, and I think the fundamental point is the one that Mr. Travers pointed out. There's contravention of the Knockshoreham Ridge guidelines, which say that 3-storey blocks of flats will not be permitted. And if this application is approved, the committee will be obviously ignoring its own guidelines. By coincidence, yesterday, another planning application was lodged in Oxton for Ashton House. Very similar in many ways. We've got a fine old property and with a proposal to convert it into apartments like Red Court. But the solution that the architects have found for that Ashton House site is not to build an apartment block, but to build 5 two-storey houses within the curtilage. And that seems to me a far more happy solution.
We are discussing this application and the merits of an application that is coming to committee possibly in the future. I don't think we should be allowed to debate preemptively.
I accept your guidance, Chair. I'm not debating that, but I'm just simply pointing out that we could find alternative ways of developing the playground site of the old school, which don't include building a block of apartments that breach our council's guidelines. And I would, I have to say that the developers have been very approachable. During the lockdown, a meeting was held virtually with about 23 local residents and the developer and the architect, and they did listen to the concerns that were expressed, and they went away and they made some, I would say, cosmetic adjustments to the design of the apartments. But as Mr. Travers said, those changes do not fundamentally change the fact that we're looking at a 4-storey block of flats in an area which is overlooked by or surrounded by 2-storey more modern developments, and it is out of scale and out of keeping. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. Is there any questions to the ward councillor? No? Okay, so it's open to debate and questions. So Sam, you already pre-indicated. I'll take you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for the officers. The lead petitioner spoke about the number of stories being in breach of planning law. So just appreciate some clarity and confirmation around that, please.
Thank you, Chair. So it was referenced to policy HS5, which is density and design guideline, which effectively does say for this area, 3-storey purpose-built blocks of flats would not be permitted. But our justification in this instance is that the securing the continued use of the listed building, together with the established sort of street scene of the buildings either side, are suitable justification to allow a building of such scale on this site.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody? Yes, Kath?
Yeah, initially I would have had a concern over policy HS5 and the density and design guidance for Noctorum Ridge. But Councillor Brain made an assertion that possibly building houses in between Red Court and the other block of flats, Oaklands, might be more sympathetic. But in terms of what I would consider aesthetics on the street scene, if the build is, if the drawings are representative of what the build will look like, and with the difference in land levels, and that this will be a 4-storey against 2 3-stories with land levels going up, I tend to think that possibly less weight can be given to HS5, as the officer has confirmed, and that aesthetically on the street scene that this might look better than putting a couple of houses in between. So whilst initially I would have had concern over HS5, I think the rationale for putting less weight on HS5 and building the flats, albeit they're 4-storey, not 3, in between Red Court, which is already a tall building, and the flats on the other side, I do feel that the officer's justification for putting less weight on HS5 is reasonable.
Yes, Dave?
Thank you, Chair. Quite a few points have been made. I listened heartedly to Mr Travers and, of course, Councillor Brame. They are people who live in this area and represent it in that format. The comment has been made about the Noctorum Density Guidelines, Area 2. This is acknowledged in the paragraph 342 and 372 of the report, the officer's report. And when you read those, it says, in the following existence residential area as outlined on the proposals map, in addition to the criteria in policy HS4, proposals for new residential developments will be subject to controls over density and layout as follows. Noctorum Ridge 2, density range 25 to 30 dwellings per hectare in 2 or 3 storey houses, or 4. And the new proposed built 3-storey block of flats will not be permitted, although the conversion of the existing property in self-contained flats will be permitted subject to policy HS 13. No objection to the building itself, the old building itself, being Grade 2 listed. As Councillor Brame said, the one on the other side has already been converted into flats. It stayed as it was one original home, but it's been converted. I can see them doing exactly the same to Red Court. The problem comes back to the development, the proposed development that's being set up in the middle. When you look at it from the street scene, density of the building, it's not subservient to the other 2 properties, which are part of the historical street scene in that line. The density of the building is far too dominant in that respect. When you look at the roof line, the line of the roof eaves, it's actually taller. Not a great deal, but it is taller. You draw a line through, so you're looking at something that's really dominant in not only mass on the frontage, but also higher in its standard as well. Given those points that the density, the block of the building from the frontage, any new development needs to be subservient to listed buildings. And again, I make that point. If you look at them and you look at that plan, which is showed from the street scene from the front, it's completely out of character with both Red Court and Sandstone. It's just completely different. The applicant has suggested that the rear building line is given by the modern extensions to Red Court. These extensions are to be demolished. The actual rear building line is given from the rear of Red Court's proper lines, which is rear of the existing flats to Oaklands. So when you look at these things, they do add up dramatically, and that the character of the area is going to be dramatically changed. And policy HS4 requires new developments to relate well and not be detrimental to the character of the area. Policy CH1 requires new developments to be of a scale appropriate to retaining character and design of listed buildings. And I don't believe that the proposal in front of us today does either of those. The policy HS4 criteria for new housing developments, proposals for new housing developments on allocated sites within the primary residential area shown on the proposal maps will be permitted subject to the proposal fulfilling all the following criteria. The proposal being of scale, which relates well to surrounding property, in particular regard to the existing densities and form of development. The proposal not resulting in a detrimental change in the character of the area. Well, just by looking at that one picture alone, there is a detrimental change to what was there. I believe there are grounds for refusal, and I will make those when the time's right. Chair. Would you like me to read them out now?
Well, if you have more debate, really, first.
Yes, that's why I said...
Are there any other members wish to ask questions? I've got Harry and Bruce.
Yeah, just to say I'm a bit disappointed that a number of the proposed flats don't meet the nationally described space standards, especially considering the size of the new block. I don't think these should be treated as an aspirational target, though we understand they're not part of the local plan as of yet. Could we perhaps just have a breakdown of how many flats are below standard in each building?
Yeah, I'll answer that now, Chair. So in the new building, the minimum, each unit is a minimum of 95% of the national described space standards. To break it down, you've got 6 are 95%, 11 98%, 12 are 100%, and 1 is 106%. But as you touched upon, it's not currently within our adopted policy. And then in the conversion, there are, of the 28 bedrooms, there are 6 that are below the normal standards. But again, we justified because of the conversion being quite important. We're happy to allow that. Thank you.
Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I visited the site myself this afternoon, and I was quite impressed with the amount of area on the site itself. I'm particularly impressed with the original school building, and obviously, you know, we need to preserve that. But I noticed that the property, when you stood opposite the original school and looked at the property to the right-hand side, this is a 3-storey building, but it also has apartments in the roof, so basically it's a 3.5-storey building. And the properties directly opposite that are very old, grand properties, and whilst they're only 2-storey, they are terrifically high, and also that they're built up as well. The land is a lot higher on the opposite side of the road. So to me, from what I could see today, I wouldn't have an objection with it. I think that it would fit in well. Thank you.
Anybody else? I'm well familiar with the site. It previously was in Clawton Ward, as you know, and when we had the boundary changes, it switched over. I don't think the picture does justice. The wall is far higher than appears on the picture, and the narrowness of the road actually means whatever position you stand in, the most physical feature is the wall. That's the first thing that catches your eye line when you look across. I know officers will have looked at this. As far as I understand, the main material consideration is the building's relation to their listed building as one of the main issues or material considerations. Now that is quite a judgmental thing, and I think if we get hung up on number of stories, I don't think that's the issue. I think it's the design and the height of the building. And even though that picture is slightly distorted, you can see that would, I'm thinking if an inspector comes on site and looks at it, what would their judgment be? They could make a judgment one way or the other. I also have to take into account that we have, in back of my mind, we have extremely testing housing figures to maintain and meet, and we are looking at trying to develop properties in areas where we can develop properties. Now, this application would make a contribution of some 45 dwellings towards whatever targets we're stretching. Now, that's not in its own right a material consideration, but if we're not going to build in residential areas and convert listed buildings, then I struggle to think where we are going to build properties in the future, and I don't want to go down that particular road. So my first issue is the material consideration, is this relationship. And it is one of, I think it probably is one of judgment. I would like the officers to come back and focus more on that part of the application, its relationship to the current building, because 3-4 stories to me is not the relevant matter. It's the mass and the height and the design. So I'll pass you over.
Chair, I think members have actually sort of summed up in many ways what the issues are sort of quite well, and what, just to sort of be clear, what you're actually looking at. And today, or tonight's debate, you've focused on two key points. One is the new build and its impact on the setting of the listed building, and the other is the impact of the new build on effectively the street scene. And those are both issues that you need to take account of, and it does come into a matter of judgment. Obviously, your officer's judgment is set out in the committee report. We've looked at this quite carefully and have been back with the applicant a number of times. We've also sought external advice in relation to the urban design of the building. So we've had an urban design consultant assist us in working with the applicant in the design of the building. So in relation to the impact on the setting of the listed building, as set out in the report, we consider that that is acceptable, and that the design changes and the changes in the material and approach make it a more contemporary design, which then doesn't compete with the listed building, which is a dominant feature in the road. In relation to the issue of 3-4 stories, I think Councillor Fowkes has sort of commented on that. It's not really a matter, I think, of looking at focusing on stories here. It's about looking at, and this is a matter for members' judgment, but it's how that building sits in the street scene. Your officer's approach to that has been that, given the scale of buildings on that street, a smaller building actually would look almost out of place, because it would sit between two quite dominant buildings. So we felt that, given with the design approach, that the scale of the property there is appropriate, and that therefore outweighs the policy of the density. So we feel that it's an appropriate approach. But that's effectively, it's a member's decision. That's what you're grappling with effectively tonight. Thank you.
Dave, you did intimate you had something to move. Do you want to read that out so that can form the basis either next debate? If there isn't, we would go to the vote.
Yes, I did, Chair. Before I do, could I ask the officers to highlight the point that I made earlier about the ridge lines on those buildings and the difference between the new one and the original buildings? Just so that people understand how high it is compared.
If we could put slide 19, the previous one up, please, Vicky. Do you want me to say anything, or did you just want to just talk over?
Well, if you draw, you can see the lines going through. The elevation it would be higher. If that was a flat road, I know it does, but as it's flat, it's a higher density. Anyway, given the comments that were made, I've got a proposal for refusal. I will move it, Chair. If nobody seconds me, I would like it recorded that it's been moved anyway. The proposed development, new build block B, due to its width, height and scale, is considered to be a detrimental impact on the character of the surrounding area, including the settings of Grade 2 listed building, and is therefore contrary to criterion 1 and 2 of the Saved Policy HS4, criteria for new housing development, and criterion 1 of Saved Policy CH1, development affecting listed buildings and structures of the Unitary Development Plan, and sections 12 and 16 of the National Policy Planning Framework. So moved, Chair.
Tell you what, I am ring rusty, aren't I? Okay, yeah, so that's fallen because there's no second there, so it can't go on the floor. So as chair, to move progress, I would move approval of the application for item 4.
Yes.
And have I got a seconder? Kath Hodgson has seconded me. Is that agreed? Okay, so obviously we will go to the vote on that, Dave. All those in favour of approval with the conditions added? 8. And those against? 1. And are there any abstentions? 1. Okay. So that matter has been approved. Chair, I am the chair. The matter has been approved. Apologies. Okay, so now we move on to item 5, which is the building, listed building consent. Unless anyone wants to move anything else, I would move approval of that. Is that seconded? Seconded by Kath again. All in favour of listed building approval on item 5, please show. Unanimous, okay. So that the listed building consent has been agreed unanimously. That takes us on to item number 6, which is Heath Close, West Kirby.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for a single-storey extension of the front, side and rear, together with a rear dormer. The property is a 2-storey detached property located within a cul-de-sac which backs onto the Wirral Way. The proposal also includes the modernisation of the property with the use of white render and aluminium windows, grey large cladding and the dormer being finished in zinc. The proposal has been amended from the original submission with amendments removing the proposed front dormer. Next slide, please. In terms of design, it's accepted that the proposal will result in a much more contemporary appearance than the current suburban traditional design. However, the use of timber cladding and aluminium windows is not particularly out of keeping with a modern domestic house. The use of zinc is kept to the dormer to the rear. Most of the alterations visible on the street scene of Heath Close are cosmetic, with the side extension being low in profile and respectful in scale to the original dwelling. As noted, the alterations will result in the dwelling being of a contemporary appearance. However, the dwelling is located at the head of a cul-de-sac, meaning it will not be prominent on the wider street scene. And in any case, it's considered that the modern design will make a positive contribution to the character of the area. To the rear, the size of the new dormer complies with relevant policy in that it's set in from either side gable and set back from the rear wall. The use of zinc continues the contemporary approach. However, as it's to the rear, it will have minimal impact on the street scene. The dormer will not negatively impact on the amenity or continued use of the Wirral Way to the rear of the site. In terms of residential amenity, the rear dormer will be sited approximately 35 metres from the rear elevations of dwellings to the rear, with the Wirral Way set between these properties. The dormer will be approximately 10 metres from the rear boundary of the site, and these distances are considered more than sufficient to ensure that the dormer doesn't impact on residential amenity. The proposed extension is single-storey and has a flat roof, and it will replace an existing flat roof garage which runs along the boundary at number 1. Given the low profile of this extension and the location and orientation of the dwelling at number 1, which you can see in the top right-hand corner of the picture, it's considered that the extension won't harm the amenities of this neighbouring property. Overall, the proposal is therefore considered to comply with adopted policy and is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
God. The reason why this is at committee is because there was 15 letters of objection. So that allows an objector to speak, I believe, under the standing orders. Is there an objector here to speak? No? Then I don't call anyone else then if there's no objector. Okay, so it's open for debate for members. Dave?
Move approval, Chair.
Anybody want to make a debate before questions or no? Okay, so it's been moved by Dave Mitchell. Has he got a seconder? Seconded by Paul Stewart. Want to see him first. Okay, all those in favour of approval, please show. None against. Okay, that's unanimous. We now move on to item 7, which is a series of performance reports. So, Kathy, you lead us through that. So, item 7 first.
So, members may recall back in February we took some performance reports to you. Our intention is to take these reports now on a quarterly basis so that it's open and transparent in relation to the Council's performance. The first report that you have there is for the planning applications performance. So it lists the fact that government, we have to do returns to government in relation to our performance in relation to determining planning applications for major, minor and other applications. So the table, that's table 1 there, sort of outlines the performance for you. So for the sort of last year, 2020-21, we determined 85% of majors within 13 weeks or an agreed extension, and 100% actually in the first quarter. Minors, 85% were determined within 8 weeks or an agreed extension of time with the applicant, and that was also 85% in the quarter. And other applications, which is effectively, it's like householders, was 93% within the 8 weeks or an agreed extension of time, and 89% within the quarter. So they're all very comfortably, as you can see from the report, within the government targets there. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Are there any questions, comments? No? We'll move on then to number... Say, yeah, the recommendation is to note. We agree to note. I'll propose it. Can someone second it? Sam's seconding it. I propose it. Okay, we note.
Okay.
Number 8.
Thank you. So agenda item 8 is relating to performance on planning appeals. So this, again, there's no actual sort of government standard on this, but clearly the performance on appeals is a good indicator of, you know, how the council's applying its policies and how successful we are at defending those. So you can see, as a rule of thumb, around about nationally, about you'd expect to want to lose or have 30% of appeals overturned. You can see from the table there that we're about on the national average. In 2021, last year, 2020-21, 31% of appeals were allowed, which is 11 out of 35, and they're listed there for you. So ease of reference. I have to say, in quarter 1 of this year, we've actually had quite a good spell on that. So we've had no appeals allowed out of 11. So that's quite a decent sort of response on the appeals. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, I think we will accept 11-0 at half-time as fairly good progress in the footballing context. Any questions on appeals? Okay, and then, so the proposal is to note. Should I propose noting? And is it seconded? Seconded by Sam. Is that agreed? No. I'm moving on to item number 9.
So item number 9 is performance in relation to planning enforcement. Members will recall that there was an enforcement policy that was adopted late last year. So this sort of outlines how the council's performing against the key milestones within sort of that policy approach in planning enforcement. It also gives an indication as to sort of caseloads. So you can see, in fact, that caseload in the first quarter of this year has gone up significantly. So between January and March, it was 49 or 68 cases were opened, 49 cases were closed. The last quarter, which is April to June, it was 139 cases were open and 118 cases were closed. So it's gone up significantly. It's obviously keeping the team very busy. Although most enforcement cases, I should say, are resolved through negotiation. So the team are sort of very active at negotiating with or any area where we have a breach. We will always investigate it. We will always seek to get a resolution. So formal action is the route of last resort, effectively. We haven't had to take any formal action in the last quarter, but we have listed there some key successes. And I would point out in relation to those successes, if you look at the one on Eastern Village, this was, there is actually a tree called a handkerchief tree. So it's not a typo. Apparently it's also called a dove tree. So something I learnt today. Okay. But again, Chair, happy to take any questions, otherwise reports for noting.
Okay, before we move forward, we have had a spokesperson we did discuss, and can you just outline the pressures, whether it be COVID related or not, but the pressures on the department? Because although the figures look okay and everything's all right, I understand anecdotally we've got sickness issues, we've got demand issues. So if you just take us briefly through them, so members get a feel for how the department's doing rather than pure stats.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Members be aware that we have got some sickness issues in the team. Development management manager is on long-term sick. That's clearly causing some pressure. I've had over the last sort of 6 months, we've also had some sickness related or within the planning officers, which is putting pressure on the team. We are clearly still very much in our minds to try and ensure that we give a good service to applicants as well as neighbours. So we're also looking at getting sort of temporary resource in to meet any gaps. However, I should say that nationally, the planning officer market is quite hard to get hold of staff. So whilst we're actively looking, we have managed and we have appointed 2 planning assistants who are graduate planners effectively, which is great because we can now sort of train those staff up and give them an opportunity to develop their planning career in Wirral. However, that takes a little while to bed those staff in. They've only been with us a few weeks, so we're hoping that will then start, will improve the throughput. We do have a backlog at the minute in terms of validating planning applications, which we are trying to get control of. So whilst the stats do look good, and they are good, it does rely on extension of time where we agree with the applicant, to extend the period for determination. From the enforcement side, you'll also see from that our workload has gone up significantly. I've just had clearance to go out for advert for another, or for an enforcement assistant, 1-year post, but we've had clearance to do that, so we'll be out to advert, and hopefully that will then start to ease that pressure and take the pressure off the team. So we're actively working, but it is, to be fair, it's pretty tough at the minute. And this team, I have to say, have been fantastic at coping, not only with COVID, but with the pressures of the increase in workload.
Okay, so the final decision we have to make is just to formally note number 9. I'll propose that. Is that seconded? Seconded by Dave. Okay, we formally note we agree that. And thanks for that recap on where the department is in the real world. Okay, so I'm not aware of any other business, am I? Formally close the meeting. Thanks to everyone for your attendance and keeping these masks on in the heat. Very much appreciated. If you enjoyed the performance, I'm Steve Fowkes. If you thought it was a load of rubbish, I'm Stuart Kelly. Okay, so there